Welcome to Beyond the Grave, where darkness and the unknown collide. Join us on a spine-tingling journey through the chilling realms of the supernatural. Prepare to be haunted by eerie tales, ghostly encounters, and the unexplained mysteries that lurk in the shadows. Subscribe now, if you dare, and let's unravel the secrets that lie beyond the grave together. Hope you would enjoy the 1-hour scary story compilation on our channel. Subscribe our channel, and press the bell icon for more disturbing and chilling scary stories. He first suspected that they were going to eat him when he noticed the distinct lack of Yuletide smells. It wasn't perhaps a conscious thought, at least not one that had been fully realized, but there was a clear growing uneasiness within him. Somehow, he just knew. Surely, if a family invited you for Christmas dinner, the house would be filled with the wonderful aromas associated with that annual feast. Succulent roast turkey, honey-glazed vegetables, perhaps the fumes of mulled wine, or a brandy-covered Christmas pudding. But no, all of these were absent. Yet the table was set. It was a particularly bleak Christmas, and while snow was often welcome at that festive time of the year, the penetrating cold and frost that seemed to sabotage both homes and their residents' bodies were not. The temperature had plummeted on the 7th, and there had been little sign of any forthcoming reprieve. Families attempted as best they could to reach one another, but for many, it was to be a lonely Christmas day. Travel, especially for the elderly, was almost impossible for fear of slipping on the ice. One fall was all it would take for a broken hip or shoulder, and for the more fragile individuals amongst them, recovering from such an injury was not an easy task. It is certainly not as easy as it would be for those of a younger generation. The Cardinal family had taken pity on an elderly gentleman who had recently moved into the neighborhood, only a few streets away. They were of an upstanding stock and took part in a local home help initiative, spending time with the elderly and vulnerable. Everyone knew and loved them. Timmy was the youngest, a boy of only 5 or 6. He was a child whom all looked upon with great adoration, never complaining, never causing trouble, always adorable. And his 10-year-old sister, Camilla, was equally admired. They were both a testament to the caring and nurturing parenting skills of Ben and Lucy Cardinal. Each year, as the cold winter drew in, the Cardinal family was admired for their dedication and commitment to those around them, their passion, and their almost zeal for helping those who were less fortunate. But behind the smiles and the skin-deep facade of a loving family lurked a far more sinister purpose. They had a tradition each year, a way to reward themselves for their kindness and generosity, one that stemmed back through many previous generations of the Cardinal family. Each Christmas, they would invite a guest for dinner who would be welcomed with open arms into their home, sit down at a beautifully set table, be provided with humorous and enjoyable Christmas conversation, and then, by the light of the roaring fire, be stabbed to death and eaten gratefully. They all reveled in the old tradition, with Timmy looking forward to it the most. He had a ferocious appetite, and a waistline to match it. But children do get so wrapped up in the anticipation of a family Christmas, and his parents were delighted to see a growing boy fill his belly. Camilla was of a more quiet disposition than her stout little brother, a slight figure with a pallid complexion that reminded all of her mother, but make no mistake, she adored eating with the family and could render anyone silent with a sharp, cold insult. Ben was the local police chief for the area, so covering up their annual feast was quite the cinch, while Lucy was, shall we say, a relative of sorts, and was entirely enthusiastic about maintaining the Christmas tradition. Their guests were invariably those without family and often of a ripe old age. Forgotten by society, they were left to wither in their isolated little houses. Ben explained to the children yearly that it was almost a kindness to put the victims out of their slowly increasing misery, and besides, when they did eventually die, they would be shoved into a box in the ground or roasted into ashes. What a waste of good meat! This year, Timmy and Camilla were especially excited. It was all their mother could do to calm their nerves, But on that Christmas Eve, it was nearly impossible, for they knew the special treat they were in for the following day. The Cardinals were hosting a very special guest. His name was Sergiu Moraru, and he hails from Eastern Europe. They had never had foreign meat before, and the very idea of tearing into some delicious exotic muscle and fat made this year's feast something to really look forward to. They had met Old Man Moraru just a few weeks earlier when Ben noticed the unusual name on his home help list. Each year, as Christmas approached, the volunteers at the local church would be given the names and addresses of pensioners in the area who had no family and would be left quite alone over the holiday season. At that festive time of year, and worried that many of the frailer residents might succumb to the biting cold, church committee members would visit each of these lonely individuals and offer a friendly ear, a helping hand, and often some hearty food to the poorest of those on the list. The names would rarely change, but at least one person on that list would sadly pass away that year. Being an upstanding member of the community and a high-ranking police officer in the area, Ben would often inform the church that one of their flock had sadly passed away, and with no friends or family known, he would concoct a lie that usually involved a long-lost son or daughter, appearing to take their sadly departed parents somewhere far away to be buried. That, or he would say that they had simply moved, having a bit of a deal with a local estate agent and solicitor firm to throw the proceeds from any property sales their way. The family was not without influence. It was incredible how little people questioned this, but as the Cardinals ensured that each Christmas meal was not an active member of the church or community, people just assumed that Ben knew best. This year, the Cardinals had been hoping to invite Lucy Rindridge around for her Christmas swan song, but unfortunately, she had died during the summer. Ben had investigated, and he suspected that an intruder had been inside the house with her at the time of her death, but it seemed as though the causes were natural. No, the family would just have to have someone different for dinner. Then the name appeared on the list. Sergiu Moraru, 86. Slight emphysema. No family. He knows no one in the area as he has only recently moved here. Perfect. Ben found Mr. Moraru to be an absolute delight. While he was obviously very frail, his mind was still sharp, and he regaled Ben with numerous colorful stories about the old country and the adventures he had while in the full bloom of youth. Of particular interest were his war stories, and Ben was thrilled to know that their main course would be that of an intelligent, well-traveled man. He even looked unlike any of the previous victims. He was quite tall, although slightly hunched with age, and with a long, crooked nose and intense stare. Ben fancied that in his youth Moraru would have been quite intimidating. His kind smile and obvious fragile frame, however, left Ben in no doubt that the kids would love him. They enjoyed eating those with character and a gentle disposition. He always enjoyed the meat more if it had a keen mind and was out of the ordinary, as the family religion, one that had managed to stay unseen yet influential throughout the centuries, stated that the eating of another human being would transmit some of its strengths to those who devoured it. As with many of those who can only look into the past rather than into the future, Sergiu Moraru enjoyed the company greatly and was touched when Ben invited him to sit at his family's Christmas table. The old man was extremely frail and required the assistance of both Ben and Camilla to help him in and out of Ben's car and then into the house. His emphysema was particularly bad that day, as each step was accompanied by the wheezing, fluid-filled sounds of struggling lungs. Each room of the Cardinal home was draped in a multicolored selection of rather crass Christmas decorations, with numerous cards adorning every visible table and a mantelpiece showcasing just how popular Ben and his family really were. The table was beautifully laid with a red cotton cloth resting underneath an elegant creme dining set. The old man found that the rest of Ben's family were just as pleasant and congenial as he was. Timmy and Camilla were kind and very well behaved for their age, helping the frail old man to his chair carefully and then waiting on him, topping up his drink as their mother and father busied themselves in the kitchen. Finally, Lucy appeared, carrying a huge centerpiece plate. It was unusually large, and as she sat it in the middle of the table, empty and devoid of food, Old Man Moraru caught a look on Lucy's face. It was brief, and he immediately attempted to disregard it as a product of his imagination, but it unsettled him deeply. It was as if a private joke had passed between the eyes of Lucy and her children, a flicker of a grin, and not one of kindness or of Christmas spirit, but rather one resembling that of a conspiratorial bully, as if Sergiu were the unwitting recipient of some unwholesome prank, waiting to be ridiculed. Just as the unease began to diminish, Ben appeared with a large, jagged carving knife and a long, two-pronged fork, which reminded Sergiu more of a butcher's implement than that required to cut a decent-sized turkey. A turkey which became increasingly conspicuous by its absence. There they sat for over an hour, each member of the cardinal family replenishing the old man's drink with enthusiasm and showing concern for every cough or moment of uncomfortable breathing experienced by their guest. But it was a strange concern. There they sat gleefully, asking Moraru questions, and then listening to the stories and answers that came about his life, where he had lived, and how many battles he had fought in. But the interest and concern seemed to be distant somehow. It was only skin-deep. Each time their guest mentioned the old country, those same conspiracy-laden glances were traded across the table, as if excited, not by the content of the stories, but rather by the simple fact that Moraru was a foreigner. The absence of not only food, but even the mere mention of it was unsettling enough. But what was more perplexing was that Ben repeatedly stole looks towards an antique clock that sat on a mantelpiece above the fire. Looks that were poorly hidden and betrayed their purpose. He was counting down the minutes to some event. While the old man had no idea what that event was, it was apparent that it was not connected to anything cooking in the kitchen oven. Moraru knew that there was simply no food being roasted, grilled, or even cooled on a window ledge nearby. Whatever was being planned was not going to involve him eating a Christmas meal. It was Camilla who stopped smiling first at his anecdotes and historical observations. She had ceased listening. No longer was she politely laughing at obvious jokes and the endearing sight of an old man repeating himself through forgetfulness. Camilla was simply staring with those pinpoint, cold, dark eyes like a snake before a strike. Timmy was next to abandon the act, as he began to grin menacingly at Sergiu as his hands gripped a small serrated steak knife intensely. The most alarming thing was that the focus of Timmy's stare was not the old man's face, but his wrinkled neck. With one last glance at the clock, Ben ceased being the jovial, attentive host and began to run his fingers along the huge carving knife in front of him, with a mixture of anger and lust upon his face. Sergiu had seen many things in his time, but nothing as surprisingly strange and unnerving as this. Finally, when the clock began to chime, Lucy relinquished her false, endearing shell and exposed the cold-hearted and twisted personality that lay beneath. As the chimes slowly rang throughout the house, one by one, echoing and lonely and piercing in their symbolism, each of the cardinals rose up from their chairs, sharp, jagged knives in hand, and waited. The chime rang once, and they uttered an indecipherable phrase in unison. The chime rang twice, and they increased their cult-like chorus in ferocity and volume. The chime rang 3 times, and then they stopped. All were silent, the house devoid of sound, Christmas spirit, and hope. The old man's wheezing grew in intensity as the uniquely bizarre sight of the twisted family about to dine dawned upon Sergiu. The family then quietly and efficiently walked around the dining table and stood motionless, surrounding their guest. Just as the old man was about to inquire what was to become of him, the clock on the mantelpiece burst into life one final time. The chime was different from the others. It was sharper, somehow fouler, and echoed once and once only throughout the cardinal home. From behind, Lucy slit the old man's throat from ear to ear as Ben thrust his carving knife deep into Sergiu's stomach. Both parents then removed their knives and stood back, watching with pride as Camilla cut and stabbed repeatedly, while Timmy thrust his steak knife in and out of Moraru's legs, neck, and arms. After a few minutes, the frenzy diminished as both children grew tired, and with one last downward thrust, Timmy drove his steak knife so deeply into the old man's hand that it skewered it completely, embedding itself into the table on which the hand rested. The children now ran to their parents' collective embrace. They hugged and rejoiced in what was a fantastic Christmas game, and now they could look forward with delight to some succulent exotic meat. Arms wrapped around one another, they stared at their victim and began to laugh loudly, commenting on the old fool's stories of times gone by, the war, and the old country. As they turned to each other once more, the laughter diminished, and they looked into each other's rosy, blood-covered faces and shared a family moment. This had been one of Ben's favorite sacrifices, but the laughter had not completely ceased. One person was still laughing loudly. Confusion turned to abject horror as the bizarre truth revealed itself. It was Mr. Moraru, sitting covered in blood, his head tilted back, and the deep cut in his throat wide open. The dinner guest laughed loudly and strongly, a laugh that was both young and old. His head arched forward as he pulled Timmy's steak knife out of his hand, dropping it on the floor. Camilla screamed as Lucy hid behind Ben. What they thought to be a corpse now stared at them all, as they had stared at it with a singular purpose. Timmy began to pee himself and cry as two previously retracted fangs cracked through the old man's upper gum, revealing a serrated and terrifying grin. As he rose to his feet, Lucy fainted, and with both hunch and age now gone, the cardinal's guest loomed tall and dark before them, his eyes piercing, telling tales of countries, decades, and centuries of existence. Sergio Moraru ate well that Christmas. Katie took a long hit on the pipe. Her eyes rolled up and back into her head. She choked on the smoke that invaded her lungs, and an attempt at a giggle was unsuccessful. Her blue eyes watered, and her almost laugh was strangled by another coughing fit. "I'm going to die," she managed to cough out. I smiled. The sight of a living paradox made me want to laugh. In fact, it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, I thought. Well, perhaps not ha-ha funny, but it was certainly absurd. And I found the absurd absolutely hilarious. Katie's marijuana-induced dilemma was no exception. We both knew Katie wasn't going to die. Not from smoking pot, anyway. She sat, cross-legged, on the floor next to the stereo, and I correctly suspected Dr. John would be crooning his voodoo melodies very soon, and that was fine with me. Katie was my girlfriend, and it seemed I could forecast her every move. Dr. John finished walking on gilded splinters, and Katie deftly raised the album from the turntable. I knew the moody blues would soothe us into the finale of a blissful evening. Our days drifted by uneventfully, and we drifted in and out of them. We both worked and made enough money for rent, tickets to concerts, and of course, drugs. We seldom indulged in anything stronger than pot or the occasional hashish that had somehow made it into New Orleans. Our tickets for the Hendrix concert lay unused on the rickety table next to the stereo. We thought it prudent to stay where we were, sitting on the floor with our backs against the wall in the living room of our uptown apartment. Neither of us dared try to drive. Most days were good. It was summer in New Orleans, and then a brief fall heralding a mild winter. Suddenly, it was summer once again. The French Quarter was its own little world, and at any given time of the day or night, it was reasonable to assume that about half of the people you met were stoned. It was the dawning of Aquarius, we told ourselves. This particular Friday evening was young, and Katie had driven the 100-mile trip to visit her family. I was considering taking a disco nap so I could party all night. It had been a while since I had been single, and I was looking forward to visiting a few old haunts. A rather loud and persistent knock at the front door interrupted my plans, and my sometime friend, Rodney, and another guy with hair down to his buttocks stood at the front door. The two guys pushed their way into the apartment, mumbling, "Hey, man," and then fell into chairs at the dining room table at the same time. They exhaled simultaneous sighs of what I took to be relief. "Man, it's intense out there," one of them said. "It's Friday night in the quarter," I answered. "Yeah, man, I know. But the quarter is full of cops. Something's going on, man. I got some really heavy vibes." Rodney was paranoid, and rightly so, as he was a walking pharmacy and usually pretty coked up. "You want some wine?" I asked them both. Rodney had neglected to introduce me. "It's Matthias," I bragged. "Sure, man, I would love some," Rodney's friend said. "I'm Ronnie." He handed me a joint, and I knew it was going to be a long evening. Rodney was busy excavating a smallish mirror from his backpack. He soon began slicing through some lumps of white powder with a single-edge razor blade. "This is the best asterisk I've ever had," Rodney said with the sincerity of a true druggie. "You gotta try it. Man, it's free. On me." He rolled a dollar bill into a straw and made 3 neat, thin lines of white powder. It looked harmless enough, and I had never tried coke. Katie was far away, and I did want to party tonight. I never really figured out what the white substance was that I so willingly snorted. My nose immediately began to burn, but Rodney assured me this was normal and would pass. I could feel it ripping into my throat. I was cool. I could handle it. What's the worst that could happen? I had smoked enough good pot to handle a little trip. I vaguely remember a fireman slapping my face and calling my name. He was so far away. I could not answer him. My throat burned, and my stomach was now on fire as well. When the EMTs came, I thought they were part of the dream, part of the trip. I guess Rodney had called them before he took off. "Stay with me," an unfamiliar voice coaxed. "Stay with me," the same voice demanded now. Something was pulling at me. 100 tiny hands clawed at me and tried to jerk me free of the firemen, the EMTs, and the tubes and needles. My next lucid moment was in a room that smelled like a hospital with walls of green tile with black trim. I glanced down to see my body on the gurney. No response. A man's voice said, "Come on, now, my brother. Stay with us." A woman's voice almost cried. I thought it odd that this woman should refer to me as my brother, and the urgency in her voice gave me pause. I came close to returning to the body that lay slack on the table, but I wasn't sure how that would be possible. "Oh, I don't think so, sister," I thought, and I took off like a backyard bottle rocket, acquiescing to the hundreds of hands that subsequently whisked me away, up and out through the ceiling of the green and black-tiled hospital room. It was scary but undeniably exhilarating. "I'm free," I said to no one. Holy shit, I'm free. My euphoria was short-lived. A high-pitched laughter spilled out from nowhere. It was a horrid, unearthly cackle, and it echoed in my head, evil and tainted, hopeless and tormented. The laughter of 100 doomed souls. Suddenly, pure terror consumed me. Oh my God, I thought. What have I done? I was young and had not given much thought to dying, but when I did consider the unlikely possibility, I convinced myself that I was not afraid of death. I wasn't too worried. I had never done anything truly terrible in my 21 years on Earth. I had never robbed, stolen, or killed anyone. I had vacillated between worrying about whether I would make it into heaven, if there really was such a place, or if my being would simply cease to exist. Secretly, I leaned toward a more spiritual experience and had considered death the ultimate trip, a cosmic journey that would provide the answers to all my questions. With friends and others, however, I would call upon the bravado only a 21-year-old could muster. Rather than profess a cosmic bend, I would confidently assert that I wasn't afraid of anything, certainly not death. What's there to be afraid of? I would ask, is my sophomoric wisdom betraying my ignorance? You die. There is no God. There is no heaven or hell. You just stop being. You stop feeling anything at all. I wasn't afraid because I had no idea what real fear was. Now, as the tiny hands hurtled me through a darkness that was blacker than the blackest of blacks and steered me through a seemingly infinite universe, I knew what fear really was. A single star, shining a million miles away, faded into oblivion. My hope faded as the light diminished. The tiny hands that had grabbed my body now clawed at my soul. I knew there was no escape. There was only the forlorn sensation of being taken through the endless darkness. I was alone, and I was lost. That is fear. That is terror. I tried to escape. I could not move. I had nobody with whom to manage the slightest of struggles. I tried in vain to fight off the hands that clung to me, taking me deeper and deeper into a destiny that I had only imagined and stupidly dismissed. I knew I was going to somewhere I did not want to go, a place I did not want to know. I don't know how I knew this. I was not thinking consciously. It was an overwhelming feeling, and the ensuing sensation of helplessness was unbearable. Please, someone help me. I screamed, but I had no voice and made no sound. I sobbed, but there were no tears. I begged for help, but no one heard me. The high-pitched laughter penetrated the core of my being, and I knew that I was not dreaming. I was not hallucinating. This was not some horrible nightmare. I was dead, and I was terrified. I could see nothing. Pitch-black darkness enveloped me. I was neither sitting, lying down, nor standing. I realized I had left my human body behind, lying lifeless on the hospital gurney. So, this is it, I thought. Will I spend an eternity in blackness? In this black hole? This nothingness? I realized I was still capable of profound fear, of terror, and of hopelessness. My thoughts and emotions were intact. I was intact. I was just dead. Oh God. I screamed without making the sound. Oh God. Oh God. Oh God. Oh God. You called? I heard a woman's voice answer. I could see a figure approaching through the darkness. It was a woman. Her face shone with a beauty beyond human comprehension. Her long brown hair waved over her shoulders, and she was dressed in a simple, white, linen-like robe. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. How can I help you? She asked without speaking. Please, please help me. I'm dead, and I haven't even lived yet. I realized I sounded like a whiny wimp. Please, I didn't mean to die. It was an accident. I'm not ready to die. I lamented. What exactly is it you want from me? She asked. I want to live, I said simply. And what exactly would you do with your life if you lived? She asked. At once, I realized that I had no plans for my life, and my past had been unremarkable. Really, I was a waste of space. I had done nothing to improve myself or the lives of others. I just was. I don't know exactly, I answered in a whisper of silence. I've never thought about it. Well, be here now and consider it, she said sternly. Consider your life and how you would like to create it, which direction you would take if you could, perhaps even how you could make the world a better place. She stopped, and the corners of her mouth turned down ever so slightly. Or not, she continued. Perhaps you would choose to create wealth for yourself, or simply continue to work for money, ingest drugs, and simply exist. That is your choice. That is your free will. I will return when you are ready. Holy crap, I thought. What just happened? The beautiful woman's words echoed in the darkness. I was compelled to review my life. And I did. I remembered being a child and exploring the wonders of a new and wonderful world. Every flower, every weed, was a wondrous thing. The azure blue of the sky was breathtaking. Each blade of grass was a new discovery. Someday, I promised myself, at age 6 or so, that I would be a grown-up and study flowers and butterflies. I would learn all about this world, and I would share it with others. In the darkness, I remembered that childhood promise. I saw my life as I aged, became a teenage brat, and then became a nothing who worked at a useless job to pay the rent and buy food and drugs. My life had been a waste. It was no wonder that I died. I had forgotten to appreciate all that life offered. It was the saddest thing, this lost potential. I felt like crying an ocean of tears, but none came. They were deep inside me now. Now I knew. I have no idea how much time might have passed before the lady came back. There was no time for me. There was only nothingness. She finally appeared, lovely and white, and stood silently, looking at me with the kindest of gazes. There was no need for words. We communicated with pure energy, an energy far beyond words. She knew that I knew, and she smiled the most glorious smile. My throat burned. "He's back." I heard someone say, "He's back." My body ached, but I was thrilled to feel the pain. "I'm back. I'm back," I thought. I could not speak, as there seemed to be something blocking my voice. I would learn later that I had been intubated and kept alive by the ER staff for over 6 minutes. They were a few seconds away from calling it, when my heart began to beat on its own. They removed the tube, and I inhaled the sweetness of the air. I was back. I was released from the hospital after a few days. I knew my life would take an entirely different course, and when I got home, the first thing I did was research the local universities. I began to navigate through the enrollment procedure for the next semester. I enrolled at the university as a biology major and never looked back. I worked hard at a part-time job, and even harder when it came to my studies, which I enjoyed immensely. Today I am an assistant professor. I have a family that I love more than my life. I'm not perfect, but I do my best. Each day is a gift, and I try to do something to deserve it. I was asked by a student today if it hurts when you die. I told him and the class this story. I guess the answer all depends upon your definition of hurt. I died for the first time on August 18, 2006. It wasn't a particularly pleasant death, nor was it one that I expected. It was simply a random act of violence that destroyed my life, and it came out of nowhere. We were just relaxing at the pub, enjoying a few drinks after a busy day at work. It was my turn to buy a round of drinks, so I was trying to get the attention of the bartender. I felt someone punch me in the side. At first, I thought someone had just hit me, but then I felt the warmth and the rapid stream of blood pouring down my shirt. I realized then and there that I'd actually gotten stabbed. As far as I can remember, it wasn't even that painful. Still, my legs gave out under me, and I collapsed to the floor. Even then, I worried more about ruining my expensive suit, ignoring the fact that I might be dying. An upcoming death is funny like that. Everyone thinks they're the exception, and that they'll get out of whatever horrible situation the universe has thrust upon them. At least that's what I thought as the life drained from my body. The world around me just faded to black, and before I knew it, I had just died. Then there was the void. At first, it was little more than darkness, only broken by weird shapes and colors in the distance. As I regained a sense of surroundings, I was dragged towards a new world, one without pain, suffering, or death. All there were people on a journey to different destinations. Whether they had all died like myself, or if they weren't born yet, I didn't know. All I knew was that I wasn't afraid anymore. The worries, the anxiety, and all my fears had been left behind. A light appeared in the distance, endlessly far away. I knew that would be my final destination and my final purpose in the brief life I'd led. Unfortunately, I never managed to get that far. I was jolted awake in my own bed, soaking wet from sweat and shaking like a maniac. My hand reflectively clutched my side to cover up the wound I'd sustained, but it wasn't there anymore. In fact, I didn't have a single scratch on me. Had it all been a dream? My phone lit up on the bedside table. I picked it up to find dozens of text messages and missed calls. "Hey man, we're at the pub. You coming or what?" The first message read, sent at 9:43 p.m. "Hey, Rick, where the hell are you?" The second message was sent at 10:23 p.m. Then there were a couple of phone calls and another message. "I guess you fell asleep, or maybe you're getting lucky. Whatever, I'll drink another shot in your honor. Happy birthday, Rick. Then I had over 20 phone calls and a singular message that sent shivers down my spine. For fuck's sake, pick up the damn phone. Something happened to Danny. I immediately called back. My fingers were trembling both from anticipation and from the memory of what had happened only a night ago. Even if my death had been little more than a nightmare, I knew for sure that I'd met up with my friends at the pub. The phone rang 3 times. Then Jake picked it up. Rick, is that you? Where the hell are you? Jake asked with a panicked, tired voice. I don't know what happened. I guess I fell asleep. I half-asked, half-stated. Danny got stabbed last night, Jake said without listening to my explanation. Stabbed? How? I don't know. Some nutjob just walked up to him and stabbed him in the side. I almost dropped my phone in shock. Danny had been attacked just like myself, in exactly the same place. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind, but worry quickly became my main concern. Is he all right? He's still in surgery. They're only letting his wife know about. Wait, here she comes. Jake put his phone down, but I could still hear the muffled sound of their discussion. Danny's wife seemed upset, but I couldn't make out the words. Jake? I asked. He's dead. Danny's dead. The next few moments turned into a blurry haze of information. We'd all known Danny since we were kids, and now he's just gone. The murderer never even made it out of the pub. Apparently, he got shot by one of the patrons as he tried to attack another guest. Still, I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to die that night. Regardless of what happened, time marched on without answers. Some of our coworkers quit after Danny's death, trying to hopelessly move on. I didn't blame them. I also needed some distance. I never even told them what I experienced that night. It wouldn't have helped them anyway. A year passed, and I hardly spoke to any of my friends. I started to get some semblance of normalcy in the wake of Danny's death, but that would all come to an end on August 18, 2007. My birthday had arrived yet again, and I had absolutely no intention of celebrating it. Instead, I called in sick to work, bought a bottle of whiskey, and spent the day playing video games. By the time day had given way to night, I'd almost finished the bottle. Even as a rather large guy, the alcohol had hit me hard. At around 9 o'clock, I just passed out in bed, awaiting a horrible hangover in the morning. I only awoke around midnight when I heard the front door forcefully break open, followed by footsteps and whispers. I tried to get up, still drowsy from the alcohol. As I took one step out of bed, I slipped and came tumbling down onto the floor. It produced a massive crash, loud enough to alert whichever intruders had broken in. I thought you said no one would be home. A man stated it angrily. Don't worry about it. I'll go deal with them. The footsteps moved quickly in my direction. I tried to lock the door, but they were too fast, kicking it open and knocking me back to the ground. A masked man entered my room, holding onto a gun. He only spoke a single sentence to me before pointing the weapon at me and pulling the trigger. You should have stayed quiet. Unfortunately, the man was a horrible shot. He'd aimed at my head, but had hit me in the throat instead. There I lay, drowning in my own blood as I desperately gasped for air. I couldn't crawl away, and I couldn't call for help. I died on my bedroom floor on my own birthday, just as I had a year earlier. Once life finally drained from my body and the god-awful pain ceased, I was back in the world beyond. I walked through the same colorful dimension that lay just on the edge of life. I admired the shapes and colors as they passed. In the distance, I saw a tree with branches stretching endlessly far from its trunk. From each branch dangled a person, real but not existing in our world. I wanted to visit them, but that wasn't my destination. Because just like before, I would awake in my own bed, unharmed by the events from the previous night. My phone buzzed, and I was filled with unfathomable dread. I still couldn't quite believe it, but I started to understand that someone would take my place in death. Hello, Rick, it's Dad. Your mother. She's passed away last night. A lump formed in my throat. I knew what was coming next, but I had to ask. How? What happened? The police say it was a burglary gone wrong. I don't know. I was working late. I should have been there. The discussion trailed off from there. My dad was distraught and could barely form coherent sentences. He blamed himself for not being there, but I knew the truth. It was my fault. During the next 2 months, he fell into deep depression. I couldn't blame him. He'd just lost the love of his life. I moved in with him just to help him pick up the pieces. He put on a strong face, trying his best to keep the ship afloat, but I could tell how close he was to just breaking down. If only I'd been there. It wasn't your fault, Dad. Had you been there, you might be gone too. You don't know that. But I did know, because the burglars weren't ever supposed to visit my parents' house. They were supposed to kill me. I had to come clean. I had to let him know the truth. But how could I? Half a year passed, and the secret ate at me. After everything that had happened, I still didn't know how to explain it. Still, I decided it was time to share my curse. Dad, can we talk? Yeah. What's going on? He asked with a worried expression on his face. He knew me well, and he could tell a heavy burden was weighing me down. I started by telling him about my first death, down to the smallest detail. Of course, it matched everything that people had witnessed in the pub that night, even the location of the stab wound. I told him Danny had taken my place in death, and that I felt guilty. Naturally, he was skeptical at first, but then I told him about my mother. I didn't spare him any details. I told him where I'd gotten shot, that the door had been broken down, and that there were 2 robbers. Every detail matched perfectly to the letter. I'm so sorry, Dad. It was my fault. I killed her. He just sat there in silence, processing what I just told him. It wasn't your fault. I was confused. There wasn't a single ounce of anger in his words, only overwhelming empathy. How can you say that? She didn't have to die. He mulled over his next words carefully before speaking. You didn't do anything wrong, Rick. You just went about your life, and these things happened to you. I don't know why you've been brought back, or even how, but you're not to blame for what is done to you. So you believe me? I asked. He nodded and embraced me in a hug. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in the world anymore. Someone knew what was happening to me. What if it happens again? Then we'll get through it together. He stood by these words, even as my next birthday rolled around. That death was more tame. I just slipped in the shower and broke my neck. The last thought that went through my mind as I left the world for a 3rd time was, how fucking cliche. Once again, I awoke in my bed. I called out for my dad, making sure he was still alive, horrified that he might have taken my place. I couldn't even breathe until he came rushing to my side, asking what had happened. I broke my neck, but I'm fine, I think. It took a while before I figured out who had taken my place at that time. But once I heard that my boss had died, something broke inside me. He was the kindest man I'd ever met, and just like myself, he'd slipped and broken his neck. That was the final straw. It wasn't some bizarre coincidence I could brush off, or a premonition. I decided then and there that I couldn't live with the responsibility. I had to put a stop to it, even if it meant giving up my own life. I figured that if I took control over my own fate and killed myself outside of my own birthday, maybe I could prevent more people from dying. First, I left behind a long letter to my father explaining why I'd chosen to leave. I couldn't face him in person. I knew he'd just try to talk me out of it, but it was something I had to do. I couldn't allow any more people to die on my behalf. Alas, fate is a fickle bitch. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't end my own life. I tried hanging, but the rope broke. Then I tried to shoot myself, but the gun jammed. When that failed, I tried to drive my car into a tree, but I somehow survived that as well. Any attempt was met with failure. All I could do was wait for my next birthday and let someone die in my place. No matter how many times I tired, I couldn't die. I was a slave to destiny, and it was destroying me. In 2009, I was hit by a drunk driver, and my girlfriend took my place. In 2010, I drowned, and my kind neighbor had to go through that death. In 2011, I died from a brain aneurysm, which ended up killing my aunt. And so on, and so on. Each year, I'd die, and a person close to me would take my place. I kept trying to find a way out, but fate wouldn't have it. Years went by, and on the 18th of August, 2019, I would die for the 14th time. I'd already fallen sick a week earlier, much to the doctor's confusion. According to each and every laboratory value, I was fine. Yet I kept getting sicker. My father and I both knew my time was near, but we also knew I'd be forcefully brought back. Then, at midnight on my birthday, my heart just gave out. I was jolted awake in my own bed, and the sickness was little more than a distant memory. Dad. I called out. No response. I got out of bed and called his name again. I was met with silence. I didn't have to call out a third time. I already knew what had happened. I carefully walked into his room, horrified at what I knew would come. He was dead, just gone through a heart attack. He'd taken my place, and I could do nothing to save him. The funeral came and went in a blur. The only noticeable thing was the missing seats from the people who had passed before him. Some of them had lived their own lives and died as nature intended, but a number of them were supposed to live on. Instead, they'd just taken my place in death. I inherited a number of things from my father. Among them, I found a letter addressed to me. It looked rather worn, so I could tell he'd written it a long time ago. Dear Richard, today is your birthday, and it has officially been a year since your mother passed. While I miss her greatly, I'm thankful to still have you around. I know that if she was given the choice, she would want you to live. I feel the same way. We both know that I might one day take your place in death. Never doubt that I would happily give my life if it meant that you could live. You didn't choose this curse, so never blame yourself. Just do what every person is supposed to. Appreciate the people around you, because you never know which day might be their last. I love you, Dad. Since I read that letter, I've been looking for a way out. My father might want me to stay behind, but how can I live on knowing that I'm taking someone's place? I've long since left town, living by myself in a cabin somewhere away from people. Hopefully, if I have no one left that cares for me, people will stop dying. At least until I can figure out not only how to die, but how to actually stay dead. I'm sorry. The following is a brief report outlining the tragic events that transpired in Western Toronto on the evening of Tuesday, June 13, 2017. Court proceedings are quietly underway, and much of the public view has been diverted in a direction I feel doesn't properly represent what truly took place that night. Whether all the details will eventually be made clear and available to the public, or worse yet, a jury, I cannot say. I will do my best to carry out what I perceive to be the correct course of action. I will compose what is, in my opinion, a factual and unbiased transcription of what actually happened. The information will be drawn from endless hours of study of case reports and personal interviews. My only request is that you do everything within your power to leave your personal bias and preconceived notions out of this. Please don't turn on the TV or scour the internet looking for what will ultimately be falsified news reports. Read the information I will leave for you here. Form your own opinion, then proceed as you see fit. Part 1. The location: Pine Grove Rehabilitation Center. Known by many of the locals as the Institution, the center served as a halfway house, a homeless shelter, and a drug addiction service of sorts. The three-story building was approximately 15,000 square feet in size and housed 37 patients and residents on its last day of operation. It was built in a residential neighborhood on a large corner lot with a sprawling lawn similar in size to a football field separating it from the street. It was, by all accounts, a welcomed member of the community. There is no history of problems or conflict with the local population. It was considered a model of operational efficiency and human rehabilitation success until the night of June 13, 2017. Part 2. The major players involved. Katie Harris is the 24-year-old rehabilitation nurse who would make the initial phone call and spur the police into action that evening. She had been working at the institution for 2 years after graduating with an honors nursing degree from Queen's University. She was one of 2 staff members working the overnight shift that evening. Tyler LeBlanc is the police chief in charge of the western part of the city. He had recently been under scrutiny. Mumblings of him stepping down were already being whispered about after serious corruption within the organization was uncovered during his tenure. His career and reputation were at risk, and his health issues and stress problems were already well documented. He was the one responsible for making the difficult decisions on the scene. Nearly all the major moves could in some way be traced back to him. Part 3. The phone call. This recording was leaked to me by someone close to the defense. This is a written transcription of exactly what was said between Toronto dispatcher Lindsay Matthews and a distraught-sounding Katie Harris at 9:51 p.m. Dispatch. Hello, this is 911. What is your emergency? Harris. Please. Help. I need all the policemen you have in the city to come to the Pine Grove Rehabilitation Center right now. Dispatch. Miss. Please try and remain calm. What is your name and current address? Harris. Fuck. We don't have time for this. I'm Katie Harris, and I'm at the institution, 3354 Coward Avenue. Dispatch. I understand. Can you please tell me what's wrong? Harris. Something is inside the building. I have no idea what it is or where it came from, but it's attacking the residents. Dear God, save us. Dispatch. Ms. Harris, I'm sending some officers on patrol close to your area. Just hang on. Can you give me any specifics on what you've seen? Loudly screaming in the background. Harris. We don't need a few officers. We need every officer in the city, and we need them now. I don't even know how to describe it. It's long and black. It's radiating heat and has these piercing yellow eyes. It's already devoured a few of the residents. The halls are filling up with smoke. Dispatch. Miss, I need you to try and remain calm. I'm having problems hearing you. Officers are on the way now. Harris. Please hurry. Oh dear, the phone was disconnected from Harris' end at 9:53 p.m. Part 4. Events on the scene below is the most accurate depiction of the events that I've been able to acquire. I've put in the exact or rough time of each occurrence to try and best represent how the sequence truly unfolded. 10:01 p.m. Upon being detailed on the above phone call, Police Chief Tyler LeBlanc issues a maximum alert, and all on-duty officers are called to the scene. 2 SWAT teams comprised of 12 officers each are deployed. LeBlanc and other members of the senior and administrative staff head to the scene as well. 10:27 p.m. All lights are off in the building. Faint smoke has been rising from some of the windows on the right side. No significant changes have taken place since police personnel arrived on scene. All officers have weapons drawn and are on high alert on the street in front of the property. Spotlights are set up, but they are not adequately illuminating the building given how far back they're built on the property. Homes in the immediate vicinity have been evacuated. LeBlanc and other high-ranking officials stand behind one of the SWAT trucks. He is on the radio with the station, trying to see if they can get more information or connect with Katie Harris again before ordering a raid of the building. 10:28 p.m. Lights turn on in the front hall of the second story. This is the first documented change in action or circumstance from the inside. Officers tense up and await orders to charge, possibly even open fire. What seems to be a long, black snake-like shape moves from one end of the building to the other. Heavy black smoke starts to rise out of the open windows after it has passed. The lights flicker briefly and then go out altogether. 10:29 p.m. An irate and deeply distressed LeBlanc starts begging and pleading for the station to try and connect him with Harris one last time. This time, the connection is successful, and LeBlanc manages the following short exchange with her. LeBlanc: "Is this Katie Harris?" Harris: "Yes." "Who is this?" "Someone with the authority to actually do something." LeBlanc: "This is the chief of police. I need you to tell me what's exactly going on in there, young lady. I have practically the whole city's police force waiting out here." Harris: "Oh, thank God. A few of us have locked ourselves in the basement. It knows we're in here. It's slithering up and down the hall. It's only a matter of time before it breaks in and starts doing what it's done to everybody else." LeBlanc: "What exactly is it? I can't go barking orders when I don't even know what I'm dealing with." Harris: Her voice becomes noticeably calmer on the recording ear. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I know how bizarre what I'm about to say sounds. You need to do everything within your power to make sure whatever the hell got in here never gets out. It's killed a lot of innocent people tonight, and it's only hunting for more. The rest of us won't last much longer anyway. So whatever course of action you take, make sure you bring a lot of force. There is evil inside this place that can never see the outside world." LeBlanc: "Ms. Harris, what in God's name are you talking about?" Harris screams away from the phone. Harris: "It's getting hot again. Please do something." An explosion goes off somewhere near the rear of the building. Harris' phone cuts out at the same time. 10:31 p.m. LeBlanc and other senior members are finalizing tactical plans to storm the building. Helicopters and additional support are being summoned to the area. Before any plan is carried out, the front doors of the institution burst wide open. Everyone I've talked to says that a communal sense of panic and paralyzing terror engulfs the policemen waiting on the street. Something emerges in the open doorway. It's tough to tell exactly what it is. The spotlights still aren't revealing enough to see properly. What appear to be two yellow dots appear and glow in the darkness. Their movement is slight. They creep forward a tiny bit and then retreat. It is almost as if whatever is there is pondering its next move. LeBlanc calls for an order for all personnel to raise and prepare their weapons. Almost immediately after, another explosion goes off in a cluster of trees to the side of the property. This is the documented breaking point for the terrified LeBlanc, who calls for an order to open fire. A hailstorm of rounds is unleashed at the building entrance. Pieces of brick go flying off, nearby windows shatter, and both doors are blown completely off their hinges. Quickly, the yellow spots disappear from view. The shooting goes on for approximately 45 seconds before LeBlanc makes the order to stop. 10:33 p.m. The original plan for storming the building is set into motion with slight variation. Officers are instructed to open fire in any situation they remotely suspect is dangerous, regardless of whether civilians are in the vicinity. The largest team heads for the front door, and many of the officers later admitted they were terrified and questioning the order to advance. Upon entering through the front entrance, they discover the mass carnage. Not at all what anyone was expecting to find. 10:34 p.m. The call for all available ambulances in the area is made. After discovering that most of the institution's patients, along with the other nurse on duty in the front hallway, were civilians, LeBlanc changed the primary objective to civilian rescue. Everyone had been gagged and bound. After being heavily sedated, according to later autopsies, and lined up against the back wall of the front lobby, there was no sign of trauma or injuries before they were hit by the barrage of police bullets. Every one of them would later be pronounced dead on the scene. 10:36 p.m. A police unit searching the basement finds the only person left alive inside the building, Katie Harris. She's smoking casually on an old wooden stool in a recreation area. She's wordless and puts up no resistance to being taken away by the officers and brought to the station. She was entirely unharmed. Part 4. Evidence found in the ensuing investigation. The most notable findings in the ensuing investigation are as follows. Internet searches on how to make homemade explosives, along with items purchased both online and in store for the bomb construction by Katie Harris. Medium-length black curtains tied to a stretcher like a long cylinder-like flag were found on the second floor. Smoke machines were purchased by Katie Harris and left under the second-floor windows. 2 yellow and battery-powered neon lights taped to a piece of Bristol board were shattered by police bullets and found on the floor of the lobby. It's believed they were simply hanging from the top of the doorframe and swaying gently in the wind. Part 5. Conclusions. I hope the above has come off as unbiased as I intended. It is my sincerest hope that you will take the information, along with whatever else you are able to uncover, and form an educated opinion of what really happened. I just want to pose a few questions here to conclude. Is the blame for the massacre entirely on LeBlanc's shoulders? The man was desperate and was in a situation that no training could have ever prepared him for. Everyone else on the scene notes being terrified as well. All other senior members confessed to being on board with opening fire. What was going through his head that night? What did he think he saw in the building and in the open doorway? Had he simply been the victim of Katie Harris manipulation? What was Katie Harris' motivation? This will always be the one that bothers me the most. If her intention was simply to murder her coworker and all residents of the institution that night, then why didn't she do it quickly and with ease while everyone slept? She was able to apprehend them easily enough and line them up in the lobby. Why not just finish the job herself? Trying to get the police to open fire only limited her chances of success. More importantly, why did it have to be the cops who did it? Why the need for such a show? I can't say what goes on inside this woman's head. I've never spoken to her directly. I've only seen her on the stand and sitting beside her court-appointed lawyer. When I look at her, I see a woman who feels no remorse. Newton, Georgia, is a small town near the Alabama border, less than an hour away from Stanwyck, my husband Robert's hometown. Newton's your typical Walmart, one high school town. People are friendly, and every November, the weather starts getting a little cooler. But there's also quite a bit of history in Newton as well. Some of it is ugly, some interesting. But recently, we've started learning some new history in this small town. A dark notoriety. You see, Newton was a quiet, all-American town. Well, before it became home to the day stalker, the police and press don't know anything about the killer. For all we know, the stalker could have been male, female, or whatever. It didn't matter. There were no clues. Just a bizarre MO, a victim that always went missing in the daytime. All of the victims were suspected to have been taken during the morning, afternoon, and evening. It didn't matter to the stalker. And then, like clockwork, the bodies were found a little less than 24 hours later, always in a remote location, always in the daytime. It turns out the stalker was a pure sunrise-sundown serial killer. The murders had been piling up for about a year now, a year of panic and turmoil. And yes, the media went fucking nuts. We had national and local affiliates patrolling the town like a swarm of buzzards. All of them are rude as fuck. I dealt with the chaos for a while. After all, I was one of the local beat writers for the Rockdale Citizen, our bi-weekly paper. Well, I should say I was a writer for them. The intrusive invasion of all these other pretentious reporters killed my action. All anyone ever wrote about was the day stalker, and these national writers all had a hell of a lot more resources than I did. There are more ways to bullshit the lack of information, at least. And since I didn't cover sports or local history, I was among the first of the Rockdale casualties. So I was laid off a few weeks ago. I guess Rockdale figured they'd let the big boys cover the day stalker. I was expendable. Well, whatever. Fuck them. I didn't need that asterisked paper. I had a degree, and Robert made good money on the police force. Me and him would still live in the heart of Newton suburbia. Only now will I have more time to write. Yeah, that's right. Local Newton reporter Michelle Lenz was now going to become a world-famous novelist, Or at least I was going to make my umpteenth attempt at it. Most importantly, though, I now have more time with my son, Billy. Billy was 8 and scared *less by the stalker coverage. I couldn't blame him, considering the fear that swept over the community like a thick fog. And like in a thick fog, we couldn't see who the killer was. We didn't know who'd be next, and even in the daytime, we had no idea when the stalker would strike again. Regardless of all the press, we Newtonites felt totally isolated. Nothing more than helpless pawns for this exploitative news story. During the long layoff, I spent more time with Billy. I think having me around comforted him. Gone were those long work nights spent at the office or covering local elections. Shit, I could even pick Billy up from school on time without having him wait around for over an hour like an embarrassed orphan. Now Billy and I were closer than ever. While Robert was stressed and overworked with the other officers, I became like both a mother and father to Billy. Both the nurturing mama and the devoted daddy would even play catch together in those cool autumn evenings. From what I saw, my constant unemployment gave Billy constant reassurance. Constant safety from the plague of unease brought upon us by both the stalker and the stifling media. Everything in Newton is so tumultuous nowadays. A feeding frenzy of news cameras and ashole anchors, they made it tough to do anything in our little town. Traffic got congested, and crowds conquered the city. And of course, putting Billy to sleep was harder than ever. With Robert gone most nights, I was always there at Billy's bedside. A lot of nights, I even fell asleep lying right next to him. A Scooby-Doo book is usually on my chest, and tonight was no different. There, we were lying on his bed. In Billy's bomb shelter of a bedroom, there were shelves of action figures, the Scooby-Doo dolls, and the countless comic books. Billy was interested in the scary stuff, just not old enough to handle the real disturbing stuff. In his room, Billy cowered beneath his Superman blankets like a terrified soldier hiding in the trenches. I could sense his unease, his trembling timidity, and Billy's nerves make him yet another victim of the day stalker. But I was there by his side. I held Billy close, my arm draped around him like a shield, all while reading him the latest adventures of Scooby-Doo. The illustrated monsters provided us with a safe spookiness from the all-too-real horror conquering our small town. As I finished the last page, I looked over and saw Billy's eyes glued to the window. Perpetual worry on his young face, I squeezed his shoulder. "Hey," I said in a soft tone. Startled, Billy looked at me with quivering eyes. "It's okay, Billy." I comforted him. "But what if he's out there?" Billy asked in a low voice. His nervous gaze drifted back to the window, to our backyard. The lighting outside illuminated the small yard, the perfect lawn I'd kept pristine due to all my free time. Even the shed out back looked nice, the opposite of the dilapidated eyesores that most of our neighbors had allowed theirs to turn into. I closed the book and laid it on the nightstand. I could see it was going to take more than Scooby-Doo to ease my baby's fears. "He's not Billy," I told him. Ever the caring mother, I leaned in closer. "I promise." Billy faced me. He could see the confidence radiating off my warm smile. "He won't get you at night," I said to him. I rubbed Billy's shoulder. "The day stalker only comes out in the daytime, remember?" "Yeah," Billy said, his voice still full of trepidation. I kissed his forehead, like a mom's kiss. Only mine was sincere. "You're safe at night, sweetie. I promise you, you are." Silent, Billy just looked at me with his big bright eyes. "Ain't no one going to get you," I continued. I pinched Billy's cheek. "Not as long as I'm here." "But what about the daytime?" Billy asked in a tremble. "What about it?" Like a paranoid scout, Billy stole another glance out the window. "What if he gets me in the daytime?" Grinning, I pulled him in closer. "Sweetie, you'll be in school." I followed his gaze out the window, out on our lovely lawn. "And when you're not, I'm with you." "Okay. Mommy's going to be here a lot now. I'm going to take you to school and take you back home." My playful hands threatened to tickle Billy. He couldn't help but laugh as he leaned in toward me. The chuckling alleviated Billy's scared state, music to my desperate ears. "Mommy's never leaving you, baby," I reassured him. "I'm always with you. Remember that." "I know." His lingering smile relieved me. Even a weak smile was better than seeing your 8-year-old son so dominated by unease. "And Daddy'll protect us too. You know he's tough. Like you." With the confidence of Wonder Woman, I strengthened my hold on Billy, showing off my physical and emotional strength. "You got that right." Right before I could give him another kiss, Billy's small hand blocked me. "But Mom." "Yes. What about Jody?" He spoke, his voice a mere whimper. He was asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted the answer to. He didn't want the answer. "Jody?" I asked, keeping my smile. "That girl from school." "Yeah." He peeked out the window. "I'm worried about her." He faced me. "Is she going to be safe too?" Supportive, I cradled Billy in my arms. "Yes. And this time, I did tickle them. I promise you, Jody'll be fine." Billy giggled like a grade school maniac, so much so that he almost fell off the bed. Grinning, I held him steady in my arms. "Jody's safe, okay? Both of y'all are." Still laughing, Billy wrapped an arm around my neck. "Okay." Like a victorious mama, I planted a kiss on Billy's soft cheek. Full of joy, we looked at each other's smiling faces. My job here was done in this arena of toys and superheroes. But deep down, I knew I'd lied. One of the few lies I'd ever tell my son. Less than 30 minutes later, Billy was sound asleep. He slept heavily too. I could go berserk in that room. But he'd never wake up. The cartoons I'd left on his flat screen were more effective than a sleeping pill. Billy didn't even budge when I stepped off the bed. I'd left him some juice and cookies on the nightstand. A little something extra in the grape juice, just in case Billy were to wake up in those next few hours. I turned off the lights in the backyard, like I always did for these late-night rituals. Dressed in my hoodie and jeans, I walked alone toward the shed. The November coldness did nothing against the warm excitement I felt within. You see, I hadn't told Billy a complete lie. He was safe, and he would always be safe. Unfortunately, I just had to lie about Jody. When she skipped school today, the opportunity was too perfect to pass up. Like when the naive fly just happens to land on that vicious trap. The little girl should have known better. After all, Newton isn't the town for skipping class. Not when the day stalker lurks about in those mornings and afternoons. I stepped inside my shed. Trembling with never-ending excitement, my hand managed to lock the door behind me. The hanging small light bulb broadcast little Jody marks lying on a table in the back. She was out cold, naked, bound and gagged in duct tape with tight precision, like a patient awaiting surgery. There were going to be no drugs to ease the pain. I'd awaken her soon enough. I always woke them up before I got started. Behind her were all my tools, items on the pegboard and shelves. Knives, spades, and hammers, all sorts of vicious weapons, all at my disposal. My exhilaration warming me from the shed's coldness, I walked up to the arsenal of weapons. My eager eyes scanned each and every one of them. My touch caressed them. There were so many choices. Throughout my pre-game ritual, I realized no one in the media would ever know that forcing me out of Rockdale had only increased my reign of terror. Back when I was working, I had a tough time with the schedule. Balancing being a mother, wife, reporter, and killer was tough. But now, well, I have all the free time in the world. While Billy was in school, I had all day to do what I wanted to do, to indulge in my sick pleasures. And tomorrow, after dropping Billy off, the police would discover what was left of Jody's body. Like a musician releasing a surprise album, I'd dump her corpse somewhere to continue this circus. My world tour of slaughter, and everyone would still fear me. They'd still be terrified of the day stalker. And through it all, Billy would always be safe. That much was true. Our relationship would never suffer. I may hurt others, but I never dare hurt him. I love Billy. While he may forever live in fear of the stalker, He'll forever love me. Finally, I settled on my sharpest garden spade. In the blade's reflection, all I saw was my wide smile. My daystalker face like a demented child at Christmas. Only I was going to have much more fun. Holding the weapon, I looked over at Jody. In just a few moments, I'd wake her. Then her helpless eyes would watch me make that first vicious wound. Her screams were suppressed. Her body was trapped. Sure, I was the daystalker. I collected my victims during those long afternoons, and I'd dispose of their bodies early in the morning. But the real work, the real fun part, always happened at night. In my hometown, there is a unique shop of oddities called Hexworks that I frequent. It's an old-world boutique that specializes in niche products that I describe as being vintage style with a modern spin. Their items include cloaks, pocket watches, lapels, bizarre art prints, lavish jewelry, and Victorian home decor, among other curiosities. Let's just say it's a great place to visit if you're ever putting together a steampunk cosplay. Hexworks is, without a doubt, my favorite place to window shop, but I rarely leave with anything. The prices are high, rightfully so, and though I love the selection, I can't really say I need anything they have to offer. It would be different if I were a convention-goer or financially stable enough to justify such luxury purchases, but alas, I am neither. Instead, I relax in the shop's tranquil atmosphere and drum up business for them whenever I get the chance to talk about the place. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. One day, however, a new product arrived at Hex, one that I couldn't help but gush over. There, sitting on an easel behind the store's front window, was a large handmade, one-of-a-kind Ouija board. The woodwork was beautiful, and the text was striking. It was crafted so elegantly that I couldn't help but be captivated by it. I had to know where it came from and how much it was going for. Curious as ever, I made my way into the shop, walked right up to the owner, and inquired about the board's origins. He told me it was a new piece sent to the shop by a friend of a friend who had inherited it from a relative. It was an heirloom that had been in this person's family for many years, passed down from generation to generation. Too spooked by the board to continue the tradition, the man donated it to Hexworks. The more the owner and I talked about it, the more I wanted the board for myself. I was never big on the occult or the paranormal, but it was too beautiful a piece to pass up. It was something I wanted for no other reason than to say I owned it. It would be a conversation piece and an item I would proudly show off to my friends and family. The downside: the owner wanted $500 for it. After a few rounds of haggling with the owner, we came to an agreement. He would put the Ouija board aside for me, and I would make weekly payments until it was paid off. He even offered me a slight friends and family discount for being a regular at the shop. After all was said and done, I would be paying $432. That was still a hefty price tag, but I was grateful for the compromise and gladly agreed to the conditions. A grueling 9 weeks later, I was the proud owner of my very own spirit board. It came in an equally well-crafted wooden chest, upon which the word Ouija was etched, along with what was presumably the year it was made, 1913. Upon opening it up at home, I noticed a few extras that came with it. Inside the chest, alongside the board, was an ivory planchette, an empty picture frame, and a small, faded pamphlet titled User Manual. The pamphlet's contents consisted of diagrams and instructions over explaining the use of the board. It more or less boiled down to place your hands on the planchette and wait for it to move. What I found peculiar was a section towards the back of the manual with a heading that read Cheat Sheet. It went like this: Want a simpler way to see your loved ones in the afterlife? Fear not. We have just the solution. Introducing the Ouija board cheat sheet. With this easy-to-follow guide, you'll be able to see those bereaved from you and know that they're okay. Simply follow these instructions. Place the frame included in your kit directly in front of the board in an upright position. Choose one of the following 29 character sequences and place your planchette over the letters and numbers accordingly. The year in which your chosen loved one was born is represented by the 4 question marks at the start of the sequence. The year in which they passed is represented by the 4 question marks at the end. Be sure to visualize the person in your mind as you move the planchette across the board. If done correctly, a still image of your loved one should appear within the frame, however briefly. This is not a precise science, and results may vary. Each string of characters works differently depending on the person, the time of day, and the area in which you are located relative to the spirit realm. If one sequence doesn't work, fret not. You can always try another. And please bear in mind that this is a one-way window. Your loved one will not be able to communicate with you when their image surfaces. Any attempt to speak with them will be met with silence. Enjoy. I chuckled at what was clearly an attempt at humor by the maker of the board. Distasteful, perhaps, but it was certainly comical. Imagine entering a code on a Ouija board and receiving a snapshot from the other side. How ridiculous. Still, something about the Ouija board cheat sheet irked me. Was the picture frame's only purpose to accompany the joke? Shouldn't the manual have clarified this a little further? And who exactly was the joke meant for, anyway? This board was one of a kind. It was more than likely commissioned by its original owner. Was such a beautifully crafted piece really meant to be nothing more than a gag gift? Having a gag myself, I set the thing up, frame and all. Whether it was out of boredom or a desire to prove to myself that the cheat sheet really was a load of malarkey, I decided to follow the instructions on a T. I grabbed a beer, chose a character sequence, and recalled the birth and death dates of my favorite family pet, Scratches. All dogs go to heaven, right? After placing the planchette over the corresponding characters, I looked up at the frame. I swear I saw a milky, white fog manifest behind the glass. No image, just cloudy particles dancing about like dust brushed off of an old book. To make sure I wasn't seeing things, I repeated the process, and to my surprise, it happened again and again. With each subsequent use, the smoky substance grew in visibility. It was still faint, but entirely noticeable. Several theories swam around my brain, many of which sank into the abyss of my collective thoughts. One, however, kept coming up for air. It was silly, but I kept considering the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the cheat sheet was legitimate. Crazy, I know, but the prospects of having a truly supernatural artifact were exciting. Even if there was a rational explanation for what I'd seen, I was at least going to have some fun playing around with the thing. And so, I took off. I called up my parents and collected the dates of various relatives who had passed away. I told them I was doing that ancestry. Come think to learn more about my heritage. Deceptive, yes, but they wouldn't have been so understanding if I told them I was dabbling in the dark arts. After gathering the information I needed, I reclaimed my seat in front of the board. I'd had a few more beers by this point, so my motor skills were not exactly in perfect working order. Because of this, I messed up the first sequence. Using my great-aunt Linda's birth and death years, I entered the code correctly, save for the O. I accidentally placed the planchette over the O in the Ouija logo at the top of the board. What happened next was surprising. I noticed my mistake and expected the frame to remain dormant, but this was not the case. To my astonishment, a clear image came into focus behind the glass. What I saw was the outline of a structure sewn into a white, foggy backdrop. As quickly as it came, the image faded out of view, leaving me baffled. What was I seeing, exactly? The building in the afterlife. Is that where buildings went upon being demolished? Or was the next world industrialized, much like Earth? Enthralled by the idea of having a peek into heaven's inner workings, I fudged up some more sequences. I plugged in random years, past, present, and future, and made up my own codes. There was no rhyme or reason for my methods. I was basically punching in random combinations just to see what would happen. I was rewarded with little results. Only a couple of my codes worked, and the images that came about were too blurry to make out any discernible features. Despite mostly failing in my endeavors, I kept at it. Sequence after sequence, I continued to move the planchette across the wood. I grew tired, but my curiosity far outweighed my eyelids. Towards the wee hours of early morning, I struck gold. One of my makeup codes worked, giving me a proper glimpse into what comes after. As clear as day, I saw a bustling street filled with what I assumed were the souls of the departed. In addition to people, there were cars, buildings, and traffic signs, the likes of which I'd never seen. It was similar to earthly scenery, but significantly different, surrounded by a flood of light and white fog. The landscape felt altogether more peaceful, for lack of a better description. Honestly, it's something I look forward to being a part of, in the distant future, of course. I was satisfied with my find, but I couldn't stop there. Using different variations of the same sequence, I pressed on. To my delight, I was greeted with more and more images of the afterlife, all of which bore great clarity, allowing me to see even the finest of details. Here are some of the things I saw. Skyscrapers, far taller than their earthly counterparts, transparent bridges connecting various parts of the heavenly community by luminescent trees and wildlife, mostly scattered about, but I did find one large forest. Glimmering pools of water around every corner, strong weather patterns. Every now and again, I'd see clouds, but they changed color from image to image. With every sequence, I found something new and unusual on the other side. I was an explorer of sorts, discovering vast sections of land in uncharted territory. This was now my hobby of choice. Unfortunately for me, it was one that wouldn't last. In an attempt to take things a bit further, I grabbed a camera, a pencil, and paper. I would record my findings and write down points of interest. I was more or less setting out to make a map of heaven. It would be a tough project, but one I would most certainly enjoy. By this point, it was around 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd been at it for about 9 hours straight, and I was more than ready to take a break and catch some shut-eye. I decided it would be best to start my cartography project after a quick nap, but I wanted to try one more sequence before going to bed. I made up another variation of the jackpot code and entered it into the Ouija board. I then watched with bated breath as familiar white particles came together like puzzle pieces to form another heavenly landscape. The anticipation was torture. I felt like an addict, biding my time as I waited for the heroine to take effect. I may have been a little obsessed, but at least the way I got my kicks was harmless. Or so I thought. Just as I was about to receive my fix, something strange happened. The pieces of the image swirled around at high speed before revealing a blank, dark background. White letters then faded into view, creating a very clear message. Stop. Perplexed, I tried another sequence, then another and another. Each time, I was greeted with the same word. I even tried older codes that I knew worked, but to no avail. For an entire hour, I tried and tried, begging the board to work again, to restore its supernatural properties. Eventually, I got one code to work, but not in the way that I'd hoped. Upon using the code, old images resurfaced, cycling backward like slides on a projector. In every one of them, something was amiss. It was distant at first, but as the frame cycled through the images, it came closer to the foreground. It appeared to be some sort of shadowy figure, pitch black and faceless, like a black cloak suspended in the shape of a person. Within a few moments, things took a turn for the worst. The darkness stayed, but the scenery changed. From the afterlife to this life. I saw still frames of my family and friends here on Earth, the shadowy figure looming behind them. I helplessly watched as it crept up on them, inching closer and closer to contact. I was horrified. Before the figure could reach out and touch my loved ones, the slideshow ceased. For a moment, the frame was empty, void of the horrors that once danced behind its glass. I was granted a breather, but not for long. After another moment or two, one last image filled the frame. It was me sitting in front of the Ouija board, just as I was then. I might as well have been staring at a reflection. Standing directly behind me, however, was the cloaked figure. It reached down and touched the back of my neck. I felt its cold fingers slide across my skin. Breaking free of my initial shock, I jumped up and ran for the door. I left my house, tired and terrified. I didn't return until the following day. After everything that's happened, I can only guess that I pissed off some angelic being upstairs by poking around its home. I saw things I never should have been able to see and overstayed my welcome, breaking some sort of divine law in the process. I've since disposed of the board, but my experience has stayed with me. I'm always looking over my shoulder and constantly checking on my family and friends to make sure they're okay. So far, so good. Though I'm alive, I can't help but feel I'm closer to death than I've ever been. Yesterday, I almost walked into oncoming traffic. A passerby had to pull me back. This morning, I felt the elevator at my work wobble a bit, and I swear it was about to fall. Maybe it's paranoia. Maybe I'm just shaken by what I saw and felt. No matter what's going on, I'm going to play it safe from here on out. What is the moral of the story? Don't fuck around with Ouija boards.